From the very beginning, I felt like a ghost in my own home. My parents never meant to be cruel, they were just absent. Busy with their work, social lives, and the endless quest to appear perfect, they barely noticed me. Birthdays passed without cards or candles. My achievements were shrugged off as if they were expected, and any small attempt I made to draw their attention was met with a distracted nod or a sigh. I learned early that love in my household was conditional, fragile, and fleeting. If I didn't perform, didn't behave, didn't shine exactly how they wanted, I was simply invisible. Even relatives seemed to forget I existed. I remember the Thanksgiving when my cousins were all laughing at the dinner table while I sat quietly in the corner, my mashed potatoes growing cold on my plate. I tried to join the conversation, but my words bounced off them like raindrops on a stone wall. The only exception was my cousin, Ella, whose warm eyes and gentle smile reminded me that not everyone ignored me. She would slip a quiet joke my way or whisper encouragement when she thought no one was watching. Those small gestures became my lifeline, tiny sparks of recognition in a house filled with shadows. School was no escape. My parents' neglect meant I had to rely on myself, so I threw myself into academics and after-school activities. I learned to carry the weight of disappointment before I even fully understood it. Every forgotten event became motivation. Every sigh, every distracted glance, every time they chose work over me, fueled an invisible fire inside me. By the time I turned 18, I was ready to leave. Packing my bags, I didn't shed tears or plead for their attention. I simply walked out, leaving behind the indifference and silence that had defined my childhood. Life outside that home wasn't easy. I worked multiple jobs, sometimes 12 hours a day, just to scrape by. I learned to budget, to plan, and to survive. There were nights when loneliness pressed against me like a physical weight, but I pushed forward. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted independence, and more importantly, I wanted control over my life. The one thing I had never had in my parents' home. Years passed, I studied relentlessly, built a career, and slowly carved out a life of my own. By the time I turned 30, I owned a small but beautiful condo in the city. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, and every corner reflected my effort, my taste, and my triumph over years of neglect. Despite the success, there was always a dull ache, a whisper in the back of my mind. You were never enough for them. You were invisible. And yet, in that ache, there was also resolve. I had survived being forgotten. I had grown strong, independent, and capable without their help. But deep down, a small, simmering desire lingered, a wish for acknowledgement, if only to show them that the child they ignored had grown into someone they could no longer overlook. Little did I know that acknowledgement would come in the most unexpected way, and it would awaken a reckoning my parents could never have anticipated. It was a Sunday afternoon, quiet and unremarkable, when my life tilted in a way I never expected. I was scrolling through social media, half listlessly, when I noticed a post from my cousin Ella. She was always careful about what she shared: online photos of vacations, family gatherings, and little celebrations, but that day, she had accidentally posted something different. The picture was casual, a smiling Ella standing in a bright, airy living room. The furniture, the decor, the sunlight streaming through tall windows. It was unmistakably my condo. She hadn't tagged me, and the caption was innocent, cheerful, something about family visits, and the joy of having space to host loved ones. But it hit me like a jolt of electricity. My carefully curated private life, the one I had built away from the neglect and invisibility, was suddenly on display for anyone who knew me. Within minutes, my phone buzzed incessantly. I glanced at the notifications and froze. Messages from my parents. And not the polite, distant check-ins they occasionally sent when I was a child. These were different, familiar, syrupy, intrusive. Wow, we didn't know you had a condo here. Such a beautiful space. How did you manage this? We're a little tight on money, maybe you could help us out. I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend the audacity. After decades of neglect, they suddenly noticed me only because my life had become visible and desirable. All those birthdays they ignored, the graduations they didn't attend, the the countless times I begged for a scrap of attention. None of that mattered. What mattered now was that I had something they wanted. Anger and disbelief surged through me, hot and sharp. I could feel the familiar sting of being unseen, now mixed with a new, bitter layer, being noticed for material success rather than for who I was. Their sudden concern, thinly veiled as interest, felt like a slap. But beneath the fury, a quiet, cold thought began to form. If they were going to come crawling now, then I had the power. Finally, the power was in my hands. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat back and watched them fumble, imagining the surprise, the calculation of what they thought they could gain. Every carefully worded message from them was like a tiny betrayal laid bare, showing me exactly how little they had cared, and how much they would care now that I had achieved what they hadn't. There was a perverse satisfaction in this realization. All those years of feeling invisible had forged me into someone resilient, patient, and cautious. I could finally step into a position they had never given me, the position of someone they now had to respect, whether they liked it or not. In that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I would let them realize the full weight of their neglect. I would show them that recognition, respect, and attention are earned, not demanded. I would let them see that the child they ignored had grown into someone formidable, someone they could no longer dismiss or control. And as I sat there, staring at the screen, the seeds of my plan began to take root. The photo wasn't just a mistake. It was an opportunity, a chance to rewrite the rules, to take back control, and if I chose, to deliver a lesson they would never forget. The game had begun. When my parents finally sent the bold request $39000, I felt a strange, controlled thrill. Not the kind that comes from wealth itself, but from realizing that, after years of neglect, I finally held the leverage. They had always believed that I existed to serve them, to bend to their whims, to fill the invisible cracks in their lives. Now the roles had reversed. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, letting the tension simmer. Every message from them, pleading, charming, subtly guilt-tripping, was an opportunity to measure exactly how far they would go. I could practically hear them rehearsing their lines. "We just want to see you. We're in a tough spot. We never realized." All their years of indifference had culminated in this absurd, desperate display. The first step was patience. I let them stew, waiting for their urgency to grow. Then I began to reply, but with deliberate, calculated politeness. Questions that sounded casual. "Oh, $39000. Is that really necessary? How long would you need to repay?" Each question, each tiny delay, forced them to confront their assumptions. Suddenly, I wasn't the invisible child, they were the ones exposed, scrambling, their entitlement laid bare. I also took care to subtly flaunt my success without gloating. Posts about work promotions, travel experiences, and home renovations found their way online. Every carefully staged photo highlighted the life they had ignored, reminding them that I had not just survived their neglect. I had thrived without them. I could feel the subtle shift in their messages, the uneasy undertone of recognition. They were beginning to realize that I was not just capable of giving, but also of withholding. Finally, I agreed to the loan, but on my terms. I drafted a repayment schedule, formalized contracts, and set clear conditions. No intrusions, no expectations, no assumptions of entitlement. Every clause was a mirror of their past neglect, a lesson wrapped in legality. They had assumed I would respond immediately, without consideration, without boundaries. They had assumed their money request would be met with blind compliance. They had assumed I was still the child who needed them. When the documents were signed and the money transferred, I felt a calm, quiet satisfaction, not vindictive joy, but the deep, unmistakable contentment of reclaiming control. I had transformed their arrogance and neglect into something they couldn't ignore, my authority over my own life. I had taught them gently but firmly that actions, or lack thereof, have consequences. More than the money itself, the real victory was the realization they had to confront. They could no longer treat me as invisible. Every boundary I enforced, every subtle reminder of my independence, was a triumph. The child they had forgotten had grown into someone they could not dismiss, someone who demanded acknowledgement, respect, and careful consideration. And in that triumph, I discovered a new truth. Revenge is sweetest not when it hurts others, but when it elevates you. By standing firm, by asserting myself, I had turned years of neglect into power, insecurity into confidence, and invisibility into undeniable presence. My parents had finally noticed me, but this time it was on my terms. For the first time, I felt truly seen. After the money was transferred and the contract signed, I didn't feel the need to gloat. There was no rush to flaunt my victory or mock their discomfort. The satisfaction was quiet, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but it ran deeper than any outward expression could convey. The true victory wasn't in the $39,000. It was in the reclaiming of my own power, the affirmation that I was no longer invisible, and the realization that I had outgrown the childhood wounds had inflicted. I continued to thrive in ways that mattered most to me. My condo became a sanctuary of achievements and personal taste, filled with memories I had chosen to make rather than those forced upon me. I entertained friends who genuinely cared, traveled to places I had once only dreamed about, and invested in experiences that nourished my mind and soul. Every step of my journey reminded me that the most important validation comes not from the people who forgot you, but from the life you build for yourself. My relationship with Ella, my cousin, and one of the few people who had always seen me, grew deeper than ever. We shared meals, laughter, and conversations that stretched into the night. She had been my ally and witness through the years of neglect, and now she became my partner in celebrating the life we were creating. Together, we reveled in the small victories, the everyday joys, and the subtle ways the universe had finally acknowledged my worth. As for my parents, the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. They had learned to respect me, though it was a respect born from necessity rather than genuine understanding. They now approached me cautiously, measuring their words and actions, aware that I had finally established boundaries they could not cross. I realized that their acknowledgement, long overdue, was not the point. The point was that I had grown beyond needing it. I was no longer seeking approval from the people who had overlooked me. I was building my own world, guided by my values, my desires, and my accomplishments. In quiet moments, I reflected on the irony of it all. For decades, I had yearned for their attention, craved validation, and longed to be noticed. And now, when they finally sought me out, I held the power. But I discovered that true satisfaction comes not from exacting revenge or proving others wrong, but from living fully, unapologetically, and on your own terms. The child they had ignored had transformed into someone resilient, self-sufficient, and unstoppable. The condo, the money, the contracts, they were symbols of my journey, milestones of the life I had fought to claim. Yet the greatest triumph was intangible, the serenity that comes from knowing that I am enough, that my worth is not contingent upon the attention or love of those who failed to provide it, and that my life is mine to live, rich with purpose and unshakable confidence. And so, I continued forward, not with bitterness, but with grace and determination. I had turned neglect into fuel, invisibility into recognition, and resentment into empowerment. In the end, the sweetest revenge was not about making them suffer. It was about proving to myself, and to the world, that the child they forgot had grown into someone extraordinary. I was finally seen, not because they remembered me, but because I had made myself impossible to ignore.